Economic development in Malaysia has been very active in recent years, and it has also become a part of the people culture as well as the economic knowledge that exists in our country. It's because many events have occurred in the last few years that has a continuous impact on the national economy, including in the import-export sector. The import and export sector is one of the sectors that are important to the national economy because this contribution sector can increase the country payment and economic growth. Import is the receiving country in an export from the sending country, and export in international rate is a good producer in one country that is sold into another country, or a service provider in one country for a national or resident of another country. However, due to the spread of COVID-19 endemic, which has several limited economic activity around the world in the recent years, this sector has undergone change. Since many activities in this sector are forbidden due to regulation imposed to prevent the spread of COVID-19, import and export activities suffer significantly.
Malaysia's goods exports fell 3.3% in the fourth quarter of 2019 to 257.9 billion ringgit Malaysia, compared to 266.8 billion ringgit Malaysia in the same period last year. The main products that contributed to the decline were electrical and electronic products, which fell by 6.5% and 25.2% respectively. Exports increased by 5.1% in the fourth quarter of 2020 from 258.2 billion ringgit Malaysia in fourth quarter 2019 to 271.5 billion ringgit Malaysia. Exports increased by 4.2% compared to the third quarter of 2020. Exports fell by 1.4% in 2020 from 995.1 billion ringgit Malaysia to 981 billion ringgit Malaysia. Imports fell by 4% to 221.4 billion ringgit Malaysia in the same quarter of 2019. Imports of intermediate goods increased by 0.9%, followed by imports of consumer goods 0.1%. However, capital goods imports fell by 8.9%. Overall, the worldwide COVID-19 pandemic has had an impact on the Malaysian economy. GDP performance for 2020 fell 5.6% compared to positive growth of 4.3% in 2019, owing to a drop in all economic sectors.
Due to the spread of COVID-19, the public health crisis is bound to have a huge impact on the world economy and international trade. After the pandemic outbreak, the scale of global import and export trade showed a sharp decline amid fluctuations. In the first half of 2020, the year-on-year decline in global import and export trade scale reached 11.98% and 13.48% respectively. The above-mentioned restrictive measure will lead to an obvious trade inhibitory effect, the direct consequences of which is to weaken the degree of trade liberalization between countries, leading to high market access barriers, sharp rise in trade costs, and may even induce trade protectionism. COVID-19 also have given a big impact into economy business like export and import. One of the biggest impacts that Malaysia faced is the devaluation of the currency. The value of the ringgit, which is reported to be shrinking at the lowest rate, that can have impact on the country's import and export sectors. Economist Dr. NURSYUHADA said the situation also has an impact on investor confidence, which affect the flow of money in and out. COVID-19 started in Wuhan in November 2019. Official news came in December, and by January 2020, there were 24 cases in Malaysia. The ringgit path shows COVID-19 pushed it from the average of 4 ringgit 10 cent before the pandemic to 4 ringgit 35 cent per US dollar by April 2020. This is a 6.1% depreciation. Other than that, it also affects the balance payments and made it negative. A country's export received less response from the importing country, while the country imports a lot of goods from abroad. In that case, the export value is less than import value. That results the country's balance of payment becomes negative. This is actually affecting the stability of Malaysia's national currency. The other impact that Malaysia faced is Malaysia's stock and currency fell after the country's king declared a state of emergency that will last until August 1 to curb the spread of COVID-19. Stocks on Malaysia's stock exchange of Bursa Malaysia tumbled during the outbreak as investors sought securities due to the expected economic impact caused by the virus, which along with other emerging stock markets are predicted to remain until June 2020.
As long as Malaysia is experiencing the COVID-19 problem, the economy issue has become a hotly debated issue in the press and the focus of many. This is said to be so because Malaysia cannot import or export goods from or to any other country. This is caused by the COVID-19 virus, which is able to spread on every surface and in the air. Because of this, Malaysia had to temporarily stop the process of importing and exporting goods. Therefore, the Malaysian government has taken several steps to deal with import and export issues experienced during COVID-19. Among them is actively promoting import substitution service. This is due to reducing dependence on external sources for the procurement of goods and services. Besides, the government is also expediting the implementation of recommendations from the National Export Council and intensifying export promotion program in 46 countries covering Asia, Europe, West Asia and the United States. This is to help exporters, especially small and medium enterprise, to get new customer prospects in new markets. Last but not least is improving last mile connectivity to Port Klang. This is to speed up the implementation of logistics and trade facilitation.
This is Port Klang.
In conclusion, the COVID-19 pandemic has distorted global supply chain as the demand side and supply side are heavily affected. It is due to the factor that this pandemic is an unpredictable event that occurs all around the world, including Malaysia. So there is nothing that can be prepared early by the government as well as citizens to face this situation. Based on the data that was discussed earlier, we can see the trend of import and export in Malaysia has experiencing changes due to the uneven trend. This situation has led to several consequences such as devaluation of currency in Malaysia and affect the balance of payments. Therefore, the Malaysian government has taken a number of actions to address the problems with import and export that surfaced during COVID-19. For instance, actively promoting import substitution services, accelerating the adoption of the National Export Council's NEC recommendations and stepping up export promotion initiative in 46 nations across Asia, Europe, West Asia and the United States, and also improving last mile connectivity to Port Klang.